Also, the big news broke in the last 2 days. Breaking: lawmakers briefed on weather modification tech conclude hurricanes, DOD-linked weather weapon deployed against American people. We're going to be talking to him about all of this here in just a moment. But first, I want to play a few clips of him recently talking about this. Here's the first one.
The question here is, how does this hurricane's path differ from others that we've seen? I've already had a lot of people call me from the Asheville area, talk specifically about the horrendous damage, and many of them pointed out that that is not Hurricane Alley per se. It's not an area that normally attracts storms. Can you help us understand this?
Well, the bottom line is it was directed there, as the transmission recordings clearly show. They kept that moisture corralled there to deluge in the same location. So again, these are patented technologies, and the fact that we have the entire so-called meteorological community denying that this is going on to protect their paychecks and pensions is absolutely criminal at this point. We know we have private defense contractors that are neck deep in the patents that manipulate these storms, Raytheon, Lockheed Martin. We know those two in particular do the weather modeling for the nation's weathermen, National Weather Service and NOAA. Again, both agencies have an illegal federal gag order on them. So at this point, this is an emperor has no clothes moment. That's the best description I can give for something that is so blatantly obvious and inarguable, can only be considered weather warfare at this point. And the fact that, again, the so-called science community is denying this manipulation is criminal. It's absolutely criminal, Colonel McGregor.
Here's one more clip of him specifically talking about Helene. Then we'll get into Milton. He can go wherever he wants with this. But it's a fact that they have the power to kill these hurricanes. They're bare minimum not doing that, which is an action in and of itself. They are in control of it by not blocking it, but clearly there's evidence with these flight paths and things that it is being manipulated. We'll talk about how they're able to do that and more of them in a moment. But there's one more clip.
If you can do so, could you tell us about some of your recent discussions, conversations, briefings that you've had with political leaders from the states in question that have asked you what you think? First of all, what did they specifically ask you, if you can tell us, and how did they respond to your answers?
Yes, Colonel McGregor, I had an hour conference call yesterday with the representatives and senators from the Carolinas, and we presented the data to them to answer their questions about how this manipulation occurs. They realized this was not a natural event. They're trying to digest the fact that their states were literally under assault from weather modification operations that are clearly connected with DOD operations. And we can speculate again on the agendas and objectives being carried out, but the fact that the storm was manipulated is absolutely inarguable. We know that technology to stop these rotations from even occurring has existed for decades with the manipulation of atmospheric pressure zones. HAARP in Alaska is one example many people are familiar with. That's an ionosphere heater. That's a weapon of mass destruction, period. It can cause an electrical chain reaction in the ionosphere, which heats it to extraordinarily high temperatures, which causes the atmosphere to bulge up and down. The downward push creates a high pressure dome that can steer the jet stream. And the same type of manipulation can create low pressure zones. When they have this type of power over the climate system, they can make or break these storms anytime they want. And again, what we see now is storms kept weaker as they're over the ocean because they're harder to steer until they reach the land-based network of transmitters. And then we have, Colonel McGregor, rapid intensification. You've heard that term probably a lot lately because that's how they manipulate these storms. And again, we have Acapulco last October being the extreme example of rapid intensification, an insignificant low pressure system developed into the strongest Cat 5 hurricane to ever hit that part of the world in less than 24 hours, laid waste to Acapulco. And by the way, Hurricane John, which just hit Acapulco again as Hurricane Helene was wreaking havoc in the Carolinas. Not many people know that. So Acapulco just got dealt another blow. So again, how many agendas and objectives are being carried out when we know they can manipulate these storms, and we know they can make or break them anytime they want? And again, I bring up the oil infrastructure in the Gulf of Mexico that seems to magically miss any sort of damaging storm again and again and again, while the storms wreak havoc inland and on shorelines, it's not a coincidence. They have that much sway over the storm.
Now, let's be 100% clear, and we'll go to our guest and give him the floor. We have the CIA director, 2015, 16, in speeches saying we can do this, we've been doing it, but we don't want to tell the public about it because of lawsuits. So it's going on. We have the leading expert, Dane Wigington, on with us, Geo-engineeringwatch.org. Right now, there's so many places to start, so many places to go here. So, Dane, I'm just going to give you the floor here to go where you think first. Dane, thanks for joining us.
Alex, good to be with you again, brother. Thank you for always staying the course in this fight on so many fronts. The American public and elected officials are beginning to wake up to the fact that the covert weather warfare assault has been waged for decades against them. In regards to Hurricane Milton and the method with which these storms have been manipulated, the spawning is a separate issue, the spawning of the storms. But what we can say definitively is they are steering these storms. And Milton took, we believe, an unexpected jog toward the southeast, toward the Yucatan Peninsula, where a massive transmitter in Cancun nudged it back on course. And we recorded those transmissions as well. It spun up to, we believe, earlier than they had scheduled it to. It spun up to the strong Cat 5 that we saw, again, making it much more difficult to manipulate. So it may have gone off course a bit from where it was scheduled to go. They're more difficult to control the stronger the storm is, especially over the ocean. Once it reaches land, we have the NextRad network that is more capable of steering these storms. And again, these are patented technologies. So whatever agendas and objectives, again, there may be about this storm, where it's scheduled to make landfall, we can speculate about, again, all those agendas and objectives. There's likely many. The screen you're showing right there, Hurricane Helene and the NextRad transmissions that have a repelling effect on the storm. That's, again, what happened in Cancun as the storm went southeast, and we believe that wasn't part of their original agenda, that it went off course a bit, and the transmitter in Cancun, very powerful transmitter, pushed it back. And again, we recorded those transmissions as well. So bottom line is these storms are being steered, period. If we go all the way back to 1947, Alex, I know you know this, many of your listeners do as well, but Project Cirrus, the U.S. military's initial onset of manipulating hurricanes, how far have they come since then? And again, for people to deny climate engineering at this point is absolutely ludicrous. And we know even Project Popeye in Vietnam in the 60s, historical record, U.S. military is so effective at controlling precipitation over that country that by the mid-70s, we have international treaties forbidding weather modification in wartime, not that anybody pays attention to those. So, Alex, this is nothing short of weather warfare, period.
I was attacking HAARP and having Dr. Nick Begich on in 2000. And in 2006, we get a call from an Air Force colonel at HAARP. And he said, the director of HAARP would like to come on. That interview's out there. And the guy came on and said, yeah, we can control the weather. We can even ignite the atmosphere, but big deal, it's not bad. So they admit all this, and we have the patents. But then at one level, the CIA head goes on C-SPAN and admits it all. But then you and I talk about it, and we get attacked, and they say we're crazy. But meanwhile, places like Dubai, for decades, admit they control their weather and can use Doppler radar to create rain or to steer storms. Why don't you explain to people how Doppler radar is able to manipulate and energize the atmosphere and steer these storms?
Again, it has a repelling effect, and that is extraordinarily visible from the NextRad transmissions that we are recording. And we recorded for Hurricane Harvey, Ian, Maria, Michael, again and again and again. And you don't need to know anything about meteorology to see visibly the effect of these transmissions on the storms. If we go to Dubai, thank you for mentioning that, is it just a coincidence that days after Dubai announced it was going to ditch the dollar, they get deluged with 2 years worth of rain in, I think, 6 hours? Is that just a coincidence? So we see this sort of scenario over and over and over. And again, when these technologies have existed for so long, and as a matter of historical record, and we have somewhat over 200 patents at this point right now existing, the denial of this is criminal. And we would argue at geoengineeringwatch.org that everybody either actively or passively participating in these crimes, be it an elected official or media or a so-called weather expert that is participating in the cover-up of these crimes, does that not make them also culpable? So at geoengineeringwatch.org, we are trying to make known who's authoring articles. For example, a recent article from the New York Times, Alex, from Christopher Flavelle, who did his best to marginalize this incredibly dire issue. He referred to the interview exchange I did with Robert F. Kennedy and tried to mock and marginalize that. These people are increasingly desperate to mask what can't be hidden for much longer. And that's what I would encourage those trying to share this most dire issue in the ridicule and resistance they get from family and friends. Know that this issue will be exposed. You can't hide this. You can't put it in the rearview mirror. It's getting bigger and more ominous in front of the windshield every day. They're becoming more bold with their weather warfare actions because the public so far hasn't responded. Even when you have a hurricane like Helene, that again, there could be various objectives there. The Piedmont lithium mine in Piedmont in North Carolina, hemorrhaging hundreds of millions of dollars with DOD contracts coming due for that lithium, the landowners being a roadblock for them, and now those landowners have been washed away, literally. So again,
and Dane, let me stop you because when I was thinking about you coming on the show yesterday, I meant to ask that question up front. So thank you for bringing up the most important point in my view. And let me just stop here, and I want you to really take your time answering this. You are, hands down, the last 25 years, the leading organization group with the scientists and others testifying to legislatures, Congress, you name it, exposing the real documents, the real admissions of this thing hiding in plain view. I am seeing explosive awakening to this in the last few years, and it's really at a crescendo now everywhere. People on the street, family, dominating social media, videos with hundreds of millions of views, just all over the place, talking about this. And so you've been hammering away at this. I've been hammering away. So many others have. And it got some traction. It's such a key issue. But now it's really broken into the consciousness. Can you speak to what's happening in your statement that they can't hold this back anymore? The storm of awakening.
Certainly, Alex. You and InfoWars have been so pivotal and key in helping to blow this issue out into the open. Your voice is heard around the world. InfoWars is known around the world. And at Geo-engineering.org, we're immensely grateful to you and InfoWars for your help with sounding the alarm on this issue. And because of the damage being done by these operations that is manifesting every single day in the DOD response to this, and I don't mean to implicate just the U.S. DOD. We have governments around the globe colluding and cooperating with this issue. In fact, so much so that we know we have historical records of Soviet climate modification scientists touring the U.S. at the height of the Cold War in the 60s, and our scientists going there. So whatever the surface tensions are between these nations, they have definitely been colluding and cooperating on climate engineering operations. So the bottom line, and what's on the screen now, I want to explain that quickly. These are localized, quote, weather modification operations that are designed as a smokescreen to mask the unfathomably larger climate intervention operations. So picture whatever particulate matter is going up on that screen, right, that's shown right now. You might have a few grams of material floating into the sky. Compare that with a KC-135 military tanker that's dumping 100 tons of toxic nanoparticles in one payload. So again, we have a power structure that's tried to mask the climate engineering operations with, quote, weather modification operations that are publicized, that are known, the single engine propeller driven aircraft many times, Alex, with a few flares on the wings that might drop, in that case, 5 kilos of material into the sky. Again, compare that with a KC-135 that will dump 100 tons in a single payload. In fact, Alex, we've extrapolated, I'll leave with this, but we've extrapolated based on our testing at Geo-engineering.org, and we took a NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, flying lab to altitude, which no private party will ever get access to again. That was a set of extenuating circumstances and great expense for us. But we took that to altitude with top scientists. It's all in the Dimming documentary. We sampled what heavy aircraft were emitting. We processed that at Rensselaer Polytechnic in New York, world-renowned lab, found what we knew we would find, starting with aluminum nanoparticles. So working with University of Minnesota with hundreds of lab tests, we have extrapolated what the likely global dispersion of these elements is, and that's about 40 to 60 million tons annually. So is it any wonder, Alex, that every other commercial on TV is asthma this, COPD COPD that, respiratory everything. And yes, there's pollution. We recognize that. We're not denying that. But when you have this intentional dumping of nanoparticles that are extremely inflammatory to the respiratory systems of toxic elements, aluminum, barium, strontium, manganese, polymer fibers, surfactants, there's HARP that you're showing now. And that HARP is an ionosphere heater. It's directional. They can bounce that signal off the atmosphere and bring it down in places over a great spectrum.
The director told me on air at the time they can ignite the atmosphere. It's so powerful.
Yeah, I've heard him say that, and we can't know the totality of their capability. What HARP does transmits 3.6 million watts of power into the electrically charged ionosphere, causes an electrical chain reaction, which superheats that layer of the atmosphere and causes the atmosphere to expand up and down. Alex, you've probably heard the term heat dome, high pressure heat dome a lot lately. We hear the meteorologists saying it all the time, right? So that's what you get from an ionosphere heater. A high pressure heat dome, that compressing air. And we're experiencing that in the West Coast right now. It's like living in hell. Temperatures never cool down day or night, and you have very little air movement under that heat dome. And they can circulate the jet stream in a clockwise manner around that heat dome in the Northern Hemisphere and direct it back down to other locations. So the degree to which the climate system has been derailed by these operations is total at this point.
Now, expanding on my question about the level of the awakening you're seeing, I appreciate the credit to us, but we're all in this together, and people are interested in the general public. Why do you think you're seeing such a mass awakening, A, and then B, just like the Manhattan Project went on for 4 or 5 years, they kept it totally secret, hundreds of thousands of people working on it. Well, we know there's all these other big projects, and we have all the CIA documents. I showed them yesterday. They admitting it was a giant secret project starting in the 60s. It even went back to 47, but officially in the 60s, going into full scale, saying it was their most important project in documents I showed yesterday. And so we're trying to expose this thing much bigger than the Manhattan Project that's hidden in plain view. So can you speak to both those questions?
Yeah, the way you frame that is exactly correct. Exactly correct. And people who deny this because they say it couldn't be hidden, it isn't being hidden. It's simply being denied. Anybody that's not clinically blind can see what's going on in our skies. You don't have grid patterns one day and nothing the next with similar atmospheric conditions unless something's being dispersed in our skies. And we have up close film footage of these aircraft, Alex, KC-10s, KC-135s, C-17s, nozzles visible turning on and off. Nothing's being hidden. We just have a public that wants to be lied to and wants to believe those lies, and that's finally, thankfully, breaking down as the public is being personally impacted by these operations. So the quote, hiding of this issue is no different than pretending that certain medical treatments are, quote, safe and effective when they're anything but. For decades, we have the whole medical industrial complex going along with that. And it makes it easier to hide also, Alex, when you have illegal federal gag orders on National Weather Service and NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, all agency operations under that gag order. So the bottom line is we have an industry that, in the case of the federal weather modification or weather disseminating agencies, are being gagged. And in case of the local meteorologists, they're just concerned about their paychecks and pensions. And Alex, they're literally reading scripts. The skies you see right there in that video are so typical in so many regions. And we have the local meteorologists days in advance, sometimes a week in advance, stating that a day will be mostly sunny or filtered sunshine. And that's filtered sunshine. How would that meteorologist know a week in advance that there's going to be aerosol spraying operations on those days unless they're reading a script?
Well, then we have, while they deny all this the last decade, all these thousands of headlines, CBS News, NBC News, BBC, they do it in Europe as well. Oh, there's a project to spray sunscreen to stop global warming and to dim the earth, and Bill Gates is involved. So they admit there's a project, and then you've got the former CIA director admitting there's a project in testing, but we don't want to, quote, scare the public, so we can't really talk about it. And then meanwhile, there's just this giant program. And then they admit what? I've seen NASA report the Earth's 20% dimmer than it was 50 years ago.
You're correct. That's where the term global dimming comes from. And for your listeners, most of which are highly educated on this, many of them might know this, but solar radiation management, that is the stated purpose for what is going on in our skies, to block some of the sun's incoming thermal energy. What's the end result of doing something this incredibly destructive? They're destroying the ozone layer, and the single biggest cause of ozone layer destruction, no, it's not getting better. It's getting exponentially worse. It's not from hairspray cans, as we were told, Alex, I'm sure you remember back in the day. Those are harmful chemicals, but that's a literal drop in the ocean compared to what climate engineering is doing. So we have that by itself increasing the thermal energy buildup on the planet, not decreasing it. And what's the DoD do when you're destroying the ozone layer from these operations? What's their solution? Spray more to block some of that incoming thermal energy, which actually destroys even more of the ozone layer and causes, in the end, more thermal energy buildup. These particles that can block some daytime heating in some locations trap more heat than they deflect. That, in the end, again, builds up more thermal energy on the surface of the planet, completely disrupting the hydrological cycle. And I don't want to make it sound like that everything going on is just some project gone awry. This project is completely malevolent. There is no benevolence in these programs.
Dane, we've got a break. Stay there. Start over with that. This is key. I want to ask what the big picture is from the leading expert in the world, Dane Wigington, Geo-engineeringwatch.org. Save it. Share it. We're live now. Share the live links. When we archive this to X, get it out. We're going to stop this. We're going to take our governments back. Stay with us. Dane, finishing up what you were saying before the break, you were getting into the fact that this is not just programs that accidentally went awry. This is a giant, massive project, obviously much bigger than the Manhattan Project, going on, as the CIA says in the documents I showed yesterday, for total control. We have a new report by Greg Reese where he has LBJ. I'd never seen that footage, talking about he who controls the weather rules the world. I mean, this is chilling stuff, so please continue.
It is chilling. Sorry to rant into the break, but it's when one has been at this for over 20 years, this has been my life nonstop, 20 years plus. I've never left my post. This is a virtual fight for life. We cannot hide from what they're dispersing in our skies. It's not only disrupting, derailing the planet's life support systems, including the ozone layer, hydrological cycle. It's contaminating virtually everything on the planet, every breath we take. And Alex, if we consider the elements being dispersed, among those elements, again, aluminum, barium, strontium, manganese, polymer fibers, surfactants, for those that have seen foaming rain or foaming runoff running down streams and curbs and streets, there's surfactants in this mix, which is used to keep the particles from coagulating and sticking together. And we have diagrams like what you're showing now on many science sources outlining exactly what we see. Everything we see in our skies, and we have the so-called climate science community denying it, and which, again, at this point is absolutely criminal, and they need to be called out as such. And I've worked in the field with USDA scientists who I know well, testing soil pH values. So much contamination is coming down in our rain that it's poisoning soils. It's changing soil pHs in Northern California, and I have the historical USDA baselines, so I'm not guessing. But I've had these scientists say to my face, Alex, sheepishly, what do you want us to do about it? They don't want to lose their paychecks and pensions. How do you face your child? How do you face yourself in the mirror knowing this is going on and doing nothing? The film you just showed of Lyndon Johnson, 1962, former President Johnson stating on film and on the record that we had the power to control the world's cloud layer then, and, quote, he who controls the weather controls the world. Of course they're doing this. Those who print the money, who control everything, they control militaries, thus they control countries, they control media. Of course they're controlling the weather, the covert weapon with which they can and are bringing populations to their knees all over the world and have been for decades without those populations ever even knowing they're under assault.
And you got interrupted by the break. Can you go back into your own words? You were saying this is not by accident. It's not a program run awry. This is malevolent. And then you start over. That's important.
Well, it is, again, because many people want to pretend that there's good intentions here. They're just perhaps running off the rails a bit. That couldn't be further from the truth. These people know exactly what they're doing. In the film, The Dimming, again, available for free on the homepage of Geo-engineeringwatch.org, and that film, in spite of social media censorship, is over 25 million views and counting. So on that film, you can see me confronting the world's most recognized climate engineer, Dr. David Keith, at an international geoengineering conference after a 3.5-hour symposium of Dr. Keith proposing, as if it wasn't already happening, the dumping of tens of millions of tons of aluminum nanoparticles into the atmosphere. And what I confronted him about was, have you done toxicological studies of doing that? And he stumbled a bit and paraphrased. He's basically stated, well, there's a lot of particulate pollution in the atmosphere anyway. A little more won't hurt. And I cornered him with that. That particulate pollution isn't aluminum, bioavailable, toxic to everything that lives, aluminum. And he then stated this, Alex, we haven't studied that. Could terrible things happen tomorrow? We don't know. What kind of a statement is that from the world's most recognized climate engineer? And this is the attitude of these people, Alex. And the second most recognized geoengineer on the planet, Dr. Ken Caldera, former Department of Defense scientist. We own an audio of him at geoengineeringwatch.org stating, in his words, what he did for the DoD, designed methods of spraying pathogens into clouds to infect the populations below. Think about that. And now we have pathogens showing up in the case of CV-19. We had 85 countries infected in 3 days. That's indicative of an airborne dispersion. We have Italian scientists that say they have found CV-19 attached to airborne particulates. Do these dots connect? So the bottom line is, again, we can hide from forms of medical procedures that we don't want, the injections. We cannot hide from what they're spraying in our skies. And at any moment of their choosing, because we have polymer fibers and graphene in our rain, that's in our lab tests. Those are used militarily for biological carrier platforms to carry a pathogen from the clouds to the ground. Why would we think the US DoD or those truly controlling the military, again, those who print the money, wouldn't do this if they become desperate enough, which I would argue they're becoming very, very rapidly? They could level the playing field overnight, Alex.